Excellent. And I can't see all of you, but I can see a few of you, which is good for me because I want to get feedback and to be able to see your bright and shiny faces this morning. So thank you and good morning. It's an honor, quite an honor, to speak to colleagues from such a prestigious institution. And I know that even virtually, these events take time and planning. So I want to especially thank Professor Khu for inviting me, as well as Soyun Sonayoon, who did some of the nitty gritty to make sure I got my information correct, and that she double checked my time difference between Seoul and here. So I very much appreciate your work, both of you, behind the scenes to make this happen. When I was doing a little bit of research about Kyunghee University, I saw that your motto is study and peace. Well, at Virginia Tech, ours is ut prosim in Latin, which means, I just went blank on it, to serve. So it's our motto that we think it's an important thing to be of service to the world, and yours to be a peacemaker in the world. So I think those are very complementary. So I look forward to, I already feel a kindred spirit with you all and with our commonality in terms of the institution. So yes, I am Nancy McGehee. Professor Khu, I'm impressed. You said McGehee. Sometimes people say McGehee and all sorts of things, and I don't care. I really don't care. But I'm always impressed when people look at all those letters and say, "Oh, it's just McGehee," which is again an inherited name from the husband. So I'm glad and I appreciate when it gets pronounced. So I'm co-editor of the Journal of Travel Research, along with my partner in crime, Professor Jim Petrick. He is at Texas A&M. And if he were here, he would say howdy, or maybe howdy y'all, because that's what they say in Texas and at Texas A&M. So he sends his greetings and I pass that along to you. So there are 5 items here, but we're only going to cover 4 of those today. As I mentioned earlier, I did a session this morning with Surrey and was sort of a last minute decision. And I think it worked out really well because one item kind of folds into the other. So what we're going to do is begin by casting your net wide and thinking broadly beyond JTR in terms of journal selection for your work. You know, how do you go about figuring out which journal is right for you? Then we'll hone in and we'll focus on JTR, because honestly, that's what everybody's probably here to listen to. That's what you want to know. We've got these new co-editors. What are they going to do? Are they going to keep on doing it the same way? Are they going to change it completely? What are they going to do? And so that's where I'll focus most of my time. I will give you a spoiler alert and tell you ahead of time that in many ways we aren't changing a whole lot, because we inherited a diamond. We inherited an amazing journal that has a legacy of 3 previous editors who worked very hard to get it where it is. We want to move that legacy forward. We want to move that dial with some of our own ideas, but we certainly have no desire to set up to change the journal in a major way. The next item is preparing for success, the manuscript creation process. So we're going to pivot from journals to you. As you work on your research and you work on a manuscript, what do you need to do to try to set yourself up for success as best you can? You know, what are the things that you do before you even submit that manuscript to help get our attention as editors, get you past desk review and on to the reviewers? The 4th item is the one that we're going to kind of skip right now. We may go back to it at the end, but I want to make sure we have time for the final item. And that is understanding manuscript evaluation, peer review best practices. Now, most of you are graduate students, correct? I know we've got some faculty as well, but most of you are graduate students, and you probably have never been asked to peer review a manuscript, and you may never have created your own manuscript. So you think, why in the world is this woman wanting to talk to me about peer review best practices? Well, this was suggested to me a while back by one of our colleagues to add it to the presentation. And initially I was like you, I thought, well, how am I going to make this work? But then it occurred to me, well, if I were taking a class and at the beginning of the semester, nobody told me what I was going to be evaluated on or how I was going to be assessed, I'd be pretty worried about that. I'd be pretty nervous because I wouldn't know what I need to focus on. So as a potential manuscript submitter, as a future or current manuscript submitter, you need to know what we as editors think is important for the peer review process. So that's why we're going to talk about that as well. Now, I want to say one thing before we jump in, and that is I will be stopping frequently and asking for questions as we move through. I don't want to wait till the end, because the end comes and you either forget what question you were going to ask, or you maybe you lose your nerve, or you just think, oh, never mind. I really want to get those questions, and I really want to be engaged as we move through the presentation, because I don't want to sit here and just hear myself for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So please, either raise your hand up, and if someone could sort of shout out to me and monitor a bit on the chat room and let me know if there's a question, or if someone's raised a hand, that would be wonderful. And I'll also be stopping from time to time and asking as well. So let's do it the first time. Before we move on, does anyone have any questions about the format and approach of what we're going to do this morning? You good? You good? All right, smiling, yes. People, faces, okay. All right. So my major professor used to tell me, cast your net wide and then focus, focus, focus. And I've never forgotten that. And so this piece of what I'm going to talk about is the cast your net wide part. She was referring to my journey as a PhD student, but I also think it's important as we're looking at our research and trying to figure out where it best fits in terms of journals. So 3 fairly straightforward words of advice that I have. First of all, know your history, see the future. What does she mean by that? Know your history means it's important, of course, to look at some of the foundational journals, the journals that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. It's important to understand their history. For fun, go to the Journal of Travel Research and look at the first issue, the very first year, and see what the titles of the work are. And then skip through about every 10 years and take a look. That'll give you a really good idea about both the evolution of the journal as well as the focus and the personality of the journal. I suggest you do the same thing with other major journals like Tourism Management or Annals of Tourism Research, as well as the hospitality journals, if that's your area as well. So dig into those grandparents, if you will, the journals that have been around the longest time, and because in part because of that, have some of the highest reputations. Next, see the future. You know, I'm one of those, I'm fast becoming one of those people on TriNet, that the old people that when somebody brings out a new journal, we think, another new journal? But I've corrected myself on that, because I think there are a lot of amazing journals that are coming out, particularly in the last few years, that are focusing on very important areas looking ahead to the future. I think that's very important. And I'll use an example of what I did back in ancient times known as the 1990s. And when I was looking for a journal to publish one of my first articles, I think it was my second article, and it was based on my master's thesis. And I saw this relatively new journal called the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. And I thought, that's me. That's the kind of the research field that I wanted, the area that I want to go. I want to, 30 years down the line, be able to say, yeah, I focused on sustainable tourism. And so I reached out to Bernard Lane, the editor at that time, and he was so incredibly helpful. I did eventually get an article published in the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. And as we know, fast forward 30 years, it's a very important journal. And Bernard, because it was a relatively new journal, had the time and the energy, just an amazing person and such an important mentor for me to really help guide me and to make sure I did the best that I could do in terms of my manuscript submission. So that's why I say know your history, but also see the future. Look to some of these newer journals that may have the potential, that are right up your alley, that are in the same area that you're interested in doing your research long term, and figuring out, do I want to start a relationship with this journal that fast forward almost 30 years and you'll be able to say, I remember when they started. So that's what I mean by that. Second item, find the strategic overlap between your current program and your target program. So you're fortunate, you're at a very prestigious institution. So you probably know, you've worked with your advisors and with the other faculty, you know where their values are. You know what the priorities are in terms of publications, how many, to what journal, how your master's thesis or your PhD is expected to be converted into an article. You know about your current program. So I'll put that as one half of the Venn diagram. The other half are your target programs. So allow yourself to dream. What are some of the 4 or 5 or 6 dream programs that you would love to end up at once you finish your graduate work? And so what you need to do is think of it as a Venn diagram. Here's your current institution. Here are your target programs. What's that overlap in the middle? I feel like it's kindergarten, right? I'm doing a little side, but what is that overlap of that Venn diagram in the middle? And that is your sweet spot. That's where you can be looking to publish and to proceed with your career. And then finally, explore alternative research distribution channels. Sometimes the work is just better suited for another channel. There's so much really interesting stuff going on right now in terms of social media, podcasts, blogs, newsletters are making a comeback. I think there's great opportunity to get your work seen and heard in other places. If at one point you feel like, well, you know what, this is something that I probably need to send somewhere else. So, questions about those 3 items before I proceed?
So, McGehee, here's my question.
Yes.
In the future, you take one example, sustainable tourism. About 40 years ago, you starting to
30. Don't make me that old. 30.
Okay, 30. Anyway, as you know, I launched my journal, the Journal of Smart Tourism. Yes. What do you think about that?
I think that's fantastic. I think that obviously we are at a time when that is an extremely important area, and it's only going to get more important. It's just like, sustainability. We were on the front end of that then. We're on the front end of smart tourism now. So I think you've got yourself an excellent idea, and I'm excited to watch it proceed and watch it bloom and flower and become wonderful.
Okay. You're the top journal editor of the Trip and the Journal of Travel Research. I am editor of bottom journal, Journal of Smart Tourism. You wait there. I will catch up.
Not yet. Yeah, that's right. That's right. You don't. Yeah, you got to start somewhere, and you're gonna leapfrog up. I feel confident. Excellent. Any other questions? All right, we'll pop ahead to the next one. So we've talked about journals in general. Now let's talk about JTR specifically. The first 1, 2, 4, 6, 8 items are items that are abbreviated versions of exactly what you're going to find at our submission guidelines. Right down here at the bottom, and I did share my PowerPoint, so folks have it, but you can also access it this way as well, are the detailed submission guidelines that can give you lots of depth for each one of these items. So I will say first and foremost, the work that when you go to the website, the first thing you're going to see is that it needs to make a substantive contribution to travel and tourism management. The focus is on travel and tourism management. It is on leading edge aspects of travel and tourism management. However, I mean, and by leading edge, that can mean a lot of different things, theoretically, methodologically, practical applications, all those things could be leading edge. But I do also want to say, don't think that just because you're working in a well-established area, well, I can't submit it to JTR, because obviously we want our field to grow and we want to have depth and history, if you will, of our work. And so don't hesitate to contribute work that's based on well-established research if it's innovative. And by innovative, that's the next things that you're going to see. Methodologically, is it innovative? Are you doing something that's on the cutting edge of some of the work that we're seeing? We're getting access to so many more sophisticated ways to be able to approach a research problem. So are you doing it in an innovative way? Theoretically, are you introducing a new theoretical foundation that's going to ultimately contribute back to that theory? So those are things that are whether it's cutting edge or well-established, I want to see that. I will say, and this is another one of those moments where if you're checking your email or you're doing whatever, to pivot back to me for a moment, the strong theoretical foundation contribution right now is probably the #1 reason why we are desk rejecting manuscripts. We want to see a strong theoretical foundation. And so regardless, you may have the greatest method in the world, but if you're not setting that foundation that then informs your method, that then you're able to discuss in the conclusions, both in terms of support for the theory as well as critiquing the theory, then that's easy. And unfortunately, that's easy for us to desk reject and move on. So right now, I would say that's one of the main reasons why we're rejecting.
McGehee, here's another question.
Okay.
You said now a strong theoretical foundation is a basic, necessity for the top tier journals. So what this then means, the strong theoretical foundation? We borrow from the marketing theory, psychological theory, and other disciplines theory, bring into our disciplines and adapt to our context. That means a strong theoretical foundation.
Yes, I mean, I think again, you've got to hit all these items here. It's got to have a level of innovation to it. It has to have a level of depth. As I mentioned, you've got to be able to discuss it on the front end in depth and show how it moves and informs the research itself, and then show how it informs your conclusions, both theoretical and practical conclusions. And so that requires a depth of knowledge, and it's not, and we can spot it from a mile away if somebody just sort of does, world of theory and picks one and says, okay, this is what I'm going to do this on. And I think it requires deep reading of a theoretical perspective, multiple theoretical perspectives, because you need to compare and contrast which ones make the best contribution for you. I can't recall if we mentioned this when we had our last discussion, but I teach the theory class, the PhD theory class every spring. And for at least the last, I would say 10 years, I ask my students first, we have a database of theories. I ask them to first research in depth one of the existing theories, and then I ask them to contribute to the database with an additional theoretical perspective. It's a real basic table, just says theory. It's got maybe the origin article, one of the first times it was used, and maybe a short description of it. It's pretty basic, but at this point it's 33 pages long. And so I am always happy to share that document with folks. And as you mentioned, we will see theories from many, many other disciplines and fields. I think it's the beauty of tourism is we're like this great playground that we're able to apply different approaches and look at the ways in which we view the world and view the tourism phenomenon or industry, depending on your perspective, by using a theoretical foundation.
Thank you.
Next, translating local research to global audience context. We all base our research somewhere, right? Unless we're looking at some truly global data set that is looking at every country in the whole world, it's located somewhere, or it's located on a target population, a group of tourists, or a group of folks in the industry. So the important thing, I always said trick, and I don't want it to make it sound like it's a trick, because it's just an important thing that you need to do with your research, is to be able to make that argument that connects that local research to a global context. Why is your work on agritourism important to my work on agritourism? What can I learn from you that will move my work forward, that will move agritourism forward overall? And so oftentimes that's a matter, well, again, it's a matter of depth of understanding the work that you're doing and depth of preparation, but it's also a matter of being able to just articulate, to say what it is and how it is that it has a global context. The next one is the number 2 reason why we desk reject articles, and that is we need an advanced level of grammar and language. And I know sometimes this is very challenging if English isn't your first language, and I appreciate that. I cannot imagine trying to submit a manuscript in Korean. That would not work for me. So I understand and appreciate that. But we are an English speaking journal, number 1. And number 2, I have to be able to read it to the level that I understand the research. So if I can't get to, all right, the point of the research because I'm stumbling on the language and the grammar, then it's really hard for me to analyze and review a manuscript. And it's much harder for me to pass it along to someone from the editorial board, to a reviewer, because I know I am giving them a lot of work. And so that's why it's important to invest, if you can, in a professional editor, to invest in friends that you can share. If you have a friend who's very fluent in English, to be able to work with them and say, hey, can you help me here with this? To do what you can, again, to put that manuscript in the best shape before you put it in front of us. And the last item that is relative to the submission guidelines is recognizing COVID's impact. We have to, it's here and it's not going anywhere. And regardless of your work, you have to be able to say, here is what the impact was on COVID, or vice versa. Or if you strongly feel that there was no impact, then you really need to make an argument for that and include that. We just can't get a manuscript that doesn't even act as if COVID exists. That's not going to work. So I think that's one of the things that's very important. The next item is good news, very good news. And this connects to what I'm saying in terms of aims, priorities, and realities for Gemini. We determined almost quite accidentally that, I guess I'll back up, because you may not know, the Journal of Travel Research is what's called Chicago style. The manuscript has to be submitted in this very sort of odd, antique way in which you have to format it, which is different from nearly all of the other journals that we publish in. So if you do your dissertation and you do it in APA format, and you want to get one article from there to submit to JTR, you've got to switch it all around to Chicago style. Well, I always thought that was Sage Publishing. I always thought that was their thing. I reach out. In fact, it's not. They said, sure, we can change it. And so the good news is we are in process for anyone who is submitting articles now. At some point, it's going to need to be an APA. We will continue the ones that have already been accepted and are in the system. They will continue at Chicago. We're not going to make folks change those. But the new articles, we will be accepting an APA. And probably a year from July, you'll see the first issue come out in APA format. So we're very excited about that. I've got to look, I've got to move to see what, globalization. Jim and I have been poring over the data as it relates to the journal. And one of the things that we're happy about that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is the continued truly globalization of the journal. It used to be an American-based journal with lots and lots of American authors. And honestly, now, if you run a report and you run a pie chart of all the different countries, it's very multicolored. We have lots of representation from all over the world. But one of the things, two areas that we'd like to see more work from are Africa and Latin America. So that's one of the things that we're going to work on. We will continue to welcome articles from all over the world and continue to cultivate that globalization. And we also think in terms of diversity in a lot of different ways. We think of diversity in terms of both authors and our editorial board, in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, location globally, as well as work, the variety of different kinds of research that's being done. So we're really looking toward an eye of diversifying both the board and our authors as much as possible. So with that said, the last item, I'll segue on to the next one, and that is you've got to recognize the competition. So when you look, and I would say this was data that I ran January last year, and I can tell you, it says 1,104 article or submissions last year, 96 per month. I can tell you every month so far this year, it has exceeded 100. We're seeing an increase, and that's just regular articles. We also get letters to the editor and Tourism Foundation conceptual articles. Letters to the editor are those, they're shorter pieces that people email us with a proposal to say, hello, I want to write a short letter that is perhaps it's a response to an article that's been published previously, or a different perspective on an article that's been published recently. And so folks submit a proposal to us and we take a look and say, yeah, give it a try. Let's see what you come up with, and we'll go from there. We often ask folks to review it as well. Maybe we don't necessarily get 3 folks to review the letter to the editor, but if it's something that is specific to a researcher that we know has a great deal of depth in that area, we're interested in getting their input. Tourism Foundation's conceptual articles, we ask for folks that are senior researchers. Oftentimes we invite them, but sometimes they send proposals to us as well. They email us and say, hey, I'm interested in looking at mental health and tourism, or some large issue that's been approached for quite some time. We don't want a literature review on COVID right now, on something that's only been around for 2 years. We want some of the well-established research and work where those are concerned. Skimming down, you will see that at the end of the day, we end up with about a 10% acceptance rate. This says 50% on desk review. I would say that in the spring, we have been more like a 30% acceptance, 70% rejection at the desk. And then again, it narrows down to 10% for the total number. Because if you reverse engineer and you look at the numbers, there's 114 articles, basically, give or take, page-wise, that we have room for. And so when you work backwards and you basically have 1,100 submissions to begin with, you see that it's, we're looking at 10% where that's concerned. The nice thing is time from completion, once you've been accepted and your work has been, you've filled out all the forms, it's right at a month until you have a DOI and you're on online first, and your work is out there for people to review and hopefully cite. Questions about this table?
Okay, here's my question.
Okay.
The reason the students do not ask you about this table, because they are students and they not much knowledge of this, how important it is. But actually, I want to share information with our students about this slide, what Nancy is presenting now. In order to get a job, in addition to school, definitely you need to publish a journal, your paper, manuscript in this journal. In order to survive, even though you get in the school as a faculty member, you need to publish it. In order to promote, you need to publish it. In order to get the tenure, you need to publish in this journal. Without publication in this journal, you got killed. And you publish, no, perish from this academic field. It is true. You go and get down to the level of a teaching school. So if our faculty member of Gyeonggi University now are attending here this seminar, probably they will agree. They agree totally about my what I'm saying now. So that's why the editor, the Dr. McGehee, she addressing these important numbers and data to you for your future. Keep in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you for your, that's a great interpretation of it. I appreciate that. And yes, I would argue that you don't, it doesn't have to just be JTR. I would say that there are some other, annals and tourism management, but I
yes,
think,
are all equivalent to the
yeah,
level.
but these are, we're fortunate, Jim and I, that we've inherited this, but yeah, this is definitely a prestigious journal that we're excited about. And here's another reason why. And we all know that impact factors come with their own interesting quirks. But I can say that in 2 years, a doubling of an impact factor, regardless of how it's assessed or where we're looking at, is pretty amazing. And you see that in terms of, here's some examples of other journals that you mentioned, the importance of JTR, but there are also other journals that are right here in the top 10 list that I think are also important as well. And it gives you just an idea of what you're looking at in terms of impact factor and our peers and colleagues. So let's pivot a little bit, and let's talk about the manuscript process and publication strategy. So you're at the beginning of your career. That's awesome. That's awesome. You've got, as we say in America, the world is your oyster. I don't know what that means, but we say that. And that means, it's right there for the taking. It's anything you want it to be. The future is yours. And so as you look forward, particularly when we're talking about your research career, it's exciting and you want to jump right in, right? You want to jump in and you want to start publishing right away, and you want to listen to what Professor Khu is saying, and you want to get that JTR article in as soon as possible. Well, no. It takes patience and it takes time. And that's why my first item on the list is start with a good idea. And that takes time. That takes time to read deeply into the research in your area, as well as tangential areas in the field that you're looking at. It takes time to go out into the field and to be in, whether it's industry or communities or what your passion is. You have to go out. We are a field. We are, we're out in the world. We're not in a laboratory. We're not my colleague who counts tree rings. That's always going to be the same. She laughs because, her class every year counting tree rings is the same. It doesn't change. And my class every year, I have to change and update because it's changing all the time because we're out in the world. So start with that good idea and don't rush it. Talk to people, read more, talk more, read more, talk more. Keep a journal of all of your ideas and as they flow through and evolve, because you may get to a point where you're like, oh, this original idea I felt about, that's not going to work this time, but it might work later. And so if you have that journal, that's that collection of ideas and thoughts that you've had, you're able to reference it later, and it honestly can be valuable for you throughout your career. Sound data makes for a sound article. There's a thing called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And what that means is if the data are bad, there's no way the article is going to be good. You're not going to be able to transform bad data or a bad methodological approach into a good article. So another reason why I say you've got to take your time and really work toward it. Don't neglect the discussion and conclusion. Sometimes that's kind of, well, honestly, sometimes I say it's a beginner's mistake, but sometimes I even get there as well. You get to the end, and this idea that you had such passion for and that you love so much, just like your first boyfriend or girlfriend, you loved it so much. By the time you get to the end, it's like an old relationship and you're pretty much over it and ready to go sometimes. So that's why it's important as you proceed through the process that you, again, with that journal of ideas, you also have a journal where you're keeping thoughts about the discussion and conclusions. You may, at the beginning of the research, have very strong feelings. I know the conclusions are going to be this, this, and this. Write that down. And then when you get to the end, you can see whether or not your thoughts were supported or not. And of course, if you're doing quantitative, your hypotheses will serve you that purpose as well. But also the anecdotal things that you think of, or the interesting things that the research or the data do while you're working on them. Keep track of those things because it's very important that you don't just sort of fade out for your conclusions. We're very interested in both theoretical and methodological and practical applications in your conclusions. So we want to see that. Make sure it passes the general reader test. Give it to mom, give it to dad, ask them to read it. Now, they're not going to necessarily understand some of the research and some of the perspective, but do they understand in general what it is you were trying to do? So the general reader test is very important. Aim for the top. Why not? Why not aim for the top? Let's see. I just saw there's some chats. I need to double check on this. Okay, got it. I'm going to tell a story, a Jim Petrick story. So he had an excellent article and he was very excited about it, and it was marketing related. And this was early in his career as a junior researcher. And he's at Texas A&M, and he asked his senior and much respected colleague, John Crompton, where should I put this? Where should I submit this? And John said, you know what? The Journal of Marketing. I think that would be a really good place for you to submit it. And Jim said, what? The Journal of Marketing? There's no way I'll get published there. That's really prestigious. And I don't have that depth of marketing. And John said, oh, I know you're going to get rejected, but you're going to get the best reviews ever. You are going to get this amazing feedback to where you're going to be able to make that article so much better that when you then pivot and submit it to a different journal, it's going to shoot up. And he said, you know what? He was right. I got great reviews. I was able to make the article much better. And as a result, it's, one of the most cited articles he's ever had. But the worst that can happen if you aim for the top is you get rejected and you get really good feedback. That's the worst that can happen. So I always suggest give it a try, aim for the top. Mm-hmm. Think about special issues. With that said, caveat, I put on my editor hat. The Journal of Travel Research does not do special issues, primarily because of those numbers you saw previously. If we were to try to insert a special issue into the stream that we have, we'd have to hold it up for people to be able to get their publications. So we really feel like it's best to just kind of go with the cream of the crop. But as an author, it's a great idea because especially as a young researcher, you can be submitting an article that will be, I'll use agritourism again, so that you would submit an article that a special issue that somebody like Carla Barbieri at NC State, who is just a giant in the field, would be submitting as well. So that special issue, you would get the attention of folks because you would be side by side with those giants in the field. Also, it gets cited, heavily cited, because if you go to a special issue, you're trying to do work on agritourism and you find a agritourism special issue, you're like, awesome, bingo, here we go. This is the foundation for my literature review. I'll branch out, but I'll start there. So think about special issues. Respect the submission guidelines. I'll try to move along on this one. If you submit a manuscript and I can tell that you've not looked closely at the submission guidelines, I wonder what else you've not looked closely at. I wonder if you've cut corners with other areas of your work. And so really, really pay attention to them. And I know they're onerous. We've tried to streamline them a little bit. and sometimes they can be really pesky, but they're important in order to really get your manuscript in the best shape to be able to be reviewed in the best possible light. Questions about this process?
I have a question.
Oh, good.
I have many questions.
Excellent.
Okay. I'm well understand what you're saying and what you try to say to us. But as far as I know, okay, this is almost a fact. As a students, as a master degree student, as a PhD students, they are very sure of their experience to make a publishing. And this kind of a top tier journalist, it totally depends on their advisor, PhD advisor or master degree advisor.
Mhm.
So even though they have a big dream and start with a good idea, but is very limited, limited their experience, and it's hard to get in your journals. As you shown us to the desk reject is almost 80%. So to our students, or to the students in the world, anyway, they have to receive the some help or assistance or mentoring from their advisor or other colleagues. So what's your idea about this point?
I guess it might be a matter of different systems, because for us, for a master's or a PhD, you work closely with your chair and you would be a co-author with them. And you work along the way. One of the things that we've done, and I don't know how much folks are doing it globally, but I initially was not in favor, and then now I've really grown to appreciate it, is we have what's called a 3-article dissertation when we're talking about the dissertation. And we go in with the design such that there's one umbrella topic, but it's designed to be 3 different articles. That helps the students along the way learn the process, learn how it works. A master's student, I don't see why you couldn't necessarily do something like that as well. But absolutely, you have to work with your chairs and with your committee members. That's another thing. We have a committee for our masters and PhDs. And so one of the things I do as the chair of my committee is I make sure at the beginning we all agree and say, okay, there's 3 articles. There's 5 of us on the committee. Article 1, here's the authorship and the order. Article 2, authorship. Article 3, and we talk about that on the onset and what makes sense in terms of their areas of expertise that we match with each of those articles. And so we absolutely support and work with our students along the way to try to do that. And again, I'll say that the worst that can happen is you get rejected. And for a desk reject, we try very hard to review on a monthly basis. Usually, both of us try to stay on top of them and go through desk reviews once a week. So if you've got 7 days, 3 articles a day, there's 21 a week that we try to get through, so that we get back to you pretty quickly if it's a desk reject, so you don't lose time. And also we try to give you some information on a desk reject, but we generally don't submit a full-on review for a desk reject. But if we send it off to reviewers, you'll get a full review, even if it comes back as a reject. And then that's typically 6 weeks. At the end of each month, we do a batch. And so it would be the most it would be about 10 weeks before you would hear something. So yeah, I guess I'd say aim for the top.
Thank you.
All right, now it's decided. Come on. Now, why is it's freezing up? Oh, there we go. Okay. Speaking of which, so in spite of your best intentions, rejection happens. Happens to all of us. It happens to me. It happens to everybody. What I tend to do, I get that rejection. I feel very sorry for myself for about a day. And I read the reviews and I bemoan them. And I think, oh no, this is terrible news. This is awful. Then I put it aside. I wait a couple days. I come back to it and fresh. And I say, all right, let's look at what the reviewers have to say. What's plan B? Where do we want to submit it to another journal? What is it that we want to do? One thing I cannot stress enough. So again, if you're checking your email or looking on YouTube or texting with your friend, please come back to me for a moment for this part, because this is very, very important. If plan B is another journal, do pay attention to the reviews that you got from the original journal. Pay attention, make those changes, address what those reviewers have asked you to address, because the odds in this very small field with very small sub areas that you get at least one of the 3 reviewers that looked at it at journal A are very high. And I can tell you that on occasion, when I have gotten an article that I reviewed for one journal and spent a lot of time really giving feedback and input, and including grammatical things, and then I get that article, that manuscript again from a different journal, and they've not even addressed typos. They've not even added a comma or a period or changed a word based on my review. I'm not happy. And so you've made my job easy, because I just harvest my old review and I say, here you go, it's still rejected. But that's just not something that you want to do. It goes back to these things take time. And so benefit from those reviews, make your article better from those reviews before you go on to the next journal.
Okay, I see.
Yes, I've had it happen before. So last area, I believe, is that we're going to look at is peer reviewer best practices. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think this is important for you as current and future researchers and manuscript submitters to understand how it is that your work is evaluated and what co-editors, what we ask of our, in this case, editorial board. So the way that the Journal of Travel Research is set up is that we have a cadre of, at this point now, about 150 people on the editorial board. Those people know when they're asked to serve, the expectation is that they will be reviewing 6, 7, 8 articles a year, okay? They know that that's happening, that I'm going to send it to them and they're going to accept it unless there's some very extenuating circumstances. That's really helpful. I've been an associate editor for Annals, and I had, I would go through 12 requests before I could get one reviewer. So the editorial board format, we feel, is a great way to structure the journal, but it's a little different from others. So we ask our reviewers to basically do these 4 items, and then I'm going to show you the check sheet for the last item. And that's where it's going to, I think, really help you as you think about your own work. 30,000 feet to ground level, substance and specificity. We want reviewers to look at it both from a distance to say, how does this contribute overall to our field, to our discipline? How does this move us forward as a body of researchers? But also specifically, on page 5, why did you use structural equation modeling instead of whatever? Anova, I don't know. So anyway, to be able to be specific as well as broad. Theory, method, practical contribution. I want to know what you think about all 3 of those areas. Next is the reviewer golden rule. What that means is do unto authors as you would have authors do unto you. And by that, I mean you want to be constructive. You want to be a reviewer that gives information to the author. That doesn't mean you need to be rude or snarky or condescending or any of those things. And it also doesn't mean that you gloss it over and say, yeah, great article, but then reject it. You need to be constructive, give them great content, but to resist the urge to be a little snarky, as we say. So, and finally, the last item is use the JTR check sheet as a guide. Now, what do I mean about that? So most of you have never been reviewers before, so you're not necessarily aware that just about every journal, when you have a reviewer when you request for someone to submit a review, they submit a written document, either a Word document, or they plug things in to a window on the platform, and they have what is a checklist of different items that we want to see where they're ranked compared to other papers. So if I'm asked to review an article back in the day before I was co-editor, I would get this it's a 2-page checklist. So this is page 1. And then I would go through each article and I would rank it according to this. Now, this is one thing that Jim and I have modified, we've worked on, and we feel a little more comfortable with the Likert scale that we've selected. And we've also kind of clarified, we had some things that we thought were sort of compound sentences that we've broken them out into separate categories. So 1, we want to see this check sheet, but 2, this is a great outline or a way for someone to conduct a review. So item number 1 is the topic directly relevant to the stated aims and scope of JTR. Now, that's something that can probably get answered quite sufficiently in maybe just 2 or 3 sentences to be able to say, yes, this is relative to the aims. This is an area of smart tourism, which we know is up and coming, and therefore, absolutely, it fits with the Journal of Travel Research. But then there might be some other things, other items. Let's see, is the manuscript, let's see. Is the literature review appropriate and up to date? That's the next to the last item on that page. That might take a little bit more work. You might be able to say, all right, well, it's appropriate, but you're missing a few citations. Let me suggest an area for you to look at. Also, in your literature review, you fail to critique the theory that you're laying out, or you fail to strongly identify the gap in the literature and the reason why your research is important. And here is what I suggest. Now, that can go on a paragraph or 2 to be a little bit more detailed. And so if you use this as a guideline, and then this is the next page, as a reviewer, it's very helpful. Also, as a manuscript writer, it's very helpful. You want to be able to look through each of these and say, all right, did I address that? Are there clearly stated and significant theoretical contributions in the conclusions of the manuscript? Was I clear about the theoretical contributions? Did I go beyond just rehashing the theory? Did I say, here's how we contributed to it? This aspect reinforces the theory. This modifies the theory. This is completely different from the theory. So again, both as a manuscript writer to use these items, and then also as a reviewer to use these items, it's a great way to provide substantive feedback, and then also to, again, set yourself up for success with your submissions. Questions about this, the checklist and peer reviews?
Actually, I submitting to JTR, and I published a few papers, and I also my paper is now under review. But I always got curious how you choose a selection the suitable review for their specific manuscript. Is
Yeah,
people are very busy, or they are hesitate to review, or sometimes. And
so that's why the editorial board format is so wonderful, because essentially they can't say no. Occasionally, if somebody's out for health reasons, or they might let us know, hey, I need to suspend my reviews for a couple months, but they know that they're obligated for us. So that's number 1, that's beneficial for us. Number 2 is we have a spreadsheet. We have both a data set, in the platform, as well as a spreadsheet that includes, all right, Joe Smith's areas of research. We have notes about that. Sometimes Joe Smith says, I do not want to ever see an article that has, I don't know, I'll use ANOVA again in it or something. They're like, that's not my area. So we get both, here's where they're interested, this is their area of expertise, but we also have notes on, yeah, they don't necessarily do this. So what we do is we wait until we have a bundle. So we go through the month and we wait till we have those 30 or so articles that we've gleaned through as the desk review. And as a unit, we assign them to the editorial board. So I have my spreadsheet and I start putting them in. I've also made notes as I've desk reviewed. Perhaps I've looked at an article and I said, you know what, Muso really needs to look at this one. And I'll make a note in the system. And so when it pulls up, I'm like, I want to make sure and assign this one to Muso. And then I'll go through and get those 3 reviewers for each manuscript. And the benefit of that and of that Excel sheet is, let's say I put an article by Smith and I say, yeah, Muso, this would be good for Muso to look at. And then I get that second article where I kept a note that said, Muso really needs to see this. I can say, whoops, wait a minute. I'll move that one to another spot. And I can move the article that I really want to make sure Muso looks at into that position. And so we can play around with that before we send it off to reviewers. Because if we try to do it as we get it, then one, we get into trouble as far as knowing, okay, has it been 6 weeks? When was the last time? You have to go back and look. When was the last time I asked this person for a review? And so we're able to really manage it in a way that, in fact, makes up time, because if we sent it out in real time and got all those no's, it would actually take longer than if we wait and bundle them and put them together and really make sure they go to the best reviewers possible. Good question. Other questions? I will take a second, the one item that I wasn't going to talk about, but since a lot of you guys are fairly new researchers, let's take a look at this one. So this is a flow chart about the whole review process. So, you know, and we forget, again, old folks like me forget that, you know, there was a day when I had no idea. That first article I submitted to JOST, I had no idea what the process was like. I got to revise and resubmit. And I was like, well, what does that mean? Am I rejected? Am I not rejected? What do I do? And so I think it's important to remember that we all had to learn at some point. And so this is basically a flow chart that looks at the process. So you submit an article initially. So up here, author submits an article. It comes to the editors, in this case, co-editors, and we take a look at it and we either say, sorry, rejected, and here's why. And we'll give you a little brief sentence, but we tend to, or a few sentences sometimes, but we don't give you a very detailed, because we just can't and do 100 in a month. Next, we say, well, wait a minute, we really think this has potential. Let's send it on to the reviewers. So that's where we assign, as Dr. Khu just mentioned, you know, how do you figure out who the reviewers are? Well, that's where we assign those reviewers. And then the reviewers assess it. And we ask them, as I said, we give them 6 weeks and say, let us know. And they send us back 2 things. One, they have a place where they can click to say, accept as is, revise and resubmit, reject, or if it's on a revision, you know, make more revisions. So they press one of those, plus they give us the review. So then Jim and I look at both those things, because sometimes you'll get people that say revise and resubmit, and you read it and you think, well, no, there are a lot of fatal flaws in this that I really don't think it's going to be able to move forward. Or you'll get somebody that says reject, and you read it and you say, well, wait a minute, these aren't, you know, terrible things. I think these are overcomable. And so you have to assess that. And as editors, that's what we do. And so we either say, okay, revise and resubmit. We say further review needed, not further review needed. We go down here. Let's see, we either say rejected or accepted. It's the most beautiful article I've ever seen. Or we go over here back to the author saying revisions required. This more than, you know, I don't know if anybody's ever gotten an article accepted without any revisions at all. So you're going to get an R1. It's going to come back and they're going to say, okay, the reviewers have said this, reviewer 1, 2, and 3. Here's what they've said. And we need you to respond to those. You respond in the paper, but you also create a separate table that addresses reviewer 1, item 1. And then you say, thank you, reviewer, for that insightful comment. we've addressed that on page 7 in this way, blah, 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 blah. Or thank you, reviewer, for that insightful comment. We have deleted that section because you're right, it's unnecessary. Or if you get a review and you think, actually, I don't think they read it closely, or maybe they missed something. It gives you the space to say, respectfully, reviewer, that's really outside the parameters of our study. It really isn't something we can address. And you do it in a respectful manner. Again, just like do unto authors as authors would have do unto you. And so then you make those revisions, you submit it back to the editors. We take a look at it. For Gemini, if it's round 1, we're going to send it back to those reviewers and say, hey, here they made the changes. What do you think? And they'll assess, and we'll take a look at those reviews and either say, congratulations, it's been accepted, or sorry, you really didn't address those revisions like we wanted you to do. That's rejected. Or you're closer, next round, revisions number 2. And it's not unusual to have 2 or 3 rounds of revisions, depending on how well you address the initial ones and how happy the reviewers are with your address. And then it goes back to you revise it and then you resubmit it to the editors again. This is usually on round 2 where it gets a little different. Sometimes we'll send it on to those reviewers yet again and say, if they were substantive, if it was a lot of changes that they still needed to make, we'll send to those reviewers. If it's just some typos and some cleanup that we feel like, okay, we can see whether or not they've addressed this, oftentimes we'll review it and say, yeah, you're good to go. Congratulations, we've assessed it. No further review is needed, accepted. Yay. So that is in a nutshell the way the process works. And if it's all new to you, then this is a great way to sort of look at it. Questions about that? Is your head exploding? Are your eyes crossed? Are you?
Yes, Professor Nancy, I had a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. And yeah, so I mean, recently I do some research in relation to like COVID-19 pandemic impacts. And yeah, so when you show the peer review process, so one of my paper is that at first, I mean, the editor accept and we go through the peer review process, but then he said need another. So it's been one more time. So it's probably take around like more than 5 months, yeah, to be exact. And because we're doing the research about the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism industry during the first phase of the COVID-19, very early in 2020. But like because we are students, so because even if you say like okay, we spend enough time to review literature and we do the data collection, so it's mean it take a long time. Even if we understand that we don't need to rush, but when I mean, so after like nearly 5 months, we got rejection, and then we go back with a lot of very, I mean, valuable feedback. So we try to reproduce a paper. We improve the paper. But then we sent to another journal, but they say that they have received some similar paper like this already. So they recommend us to submit to other journal. So it's mean in 2021, and I mean, my research topic has been somehow like outdated already. So it's mean they said that we are looking for post pandemic crisis paper, community like empowerment, for example, the renaissance, how to reproduce, how to recover, for example. So yeah, so I mean, according to like JTR, like in the future, like what are your like research interests? I mean, the areas that JTR are looking for, because we know that COVID-19 pandemic, it will not end very soon, but what is some research interest that JTR are looking for? Yes, so that I think that maybe I will start doing something about COVID again. But anyway, my paper this paper seemed to be outdated, and I haven't submitted to any journal.
Okay,
Yes.
hey student, when you give questions, make it short for.
Oh yeah, it's still to be too long, right? So
No,
yeah.
that's okay. That's okay. I understand your question and your interest in certain areas. Jim and I, as co-editors, feel very strongly that we're looking for good research. We're not limiting any topics or subjects. We're not necessarily focusing on specific topics or subjects. We want strong, solid research. And so I would never, and this morning at Surrey, Professor Font wanted me to say, he made a scenario and said, well, would you accept that? And I was like, I have no idea. I'm not going to necessarily comment on either an area of research or even a method that without seeing the full article. But I can say that, we're definitely open to anything and everything that fits within the submission guidelines. And I think part of the trick, and I think I keep using trick, and it's not a trick. Part of I guess the secret, or the thing that you need to focus on, is figuring out a way to show us how relevant it is, how cutting edge it is, how it fits with all the aims and scope of the Journal of Travel Research, and then how how it's the global context and how it's connected to other work. And so when we're able to see that, that's what we're looking for across any kind of substantive area.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Let's see. This is just a quick, when you're talking about research topics, this is actually just what a quick and dirty review that I did looking at work in 2010 and 2021, and basically did both an open and focused code of the most cited articles in Annals, JTR, and Tourism Management, both in 2010 and then 2021. And I looked for the kind of the top 7 subject areas, sort of broadly defined. And then we looked at sort of the differences and the changes that we saw between 2010 and 2021. I hesitate in some ways to share this, only because I don't want you to look at this and say, oh no, I'm doing experience co-creation. That's so 2010. That's not the case. I am merely looking at the most cited articles in that year. And in 2010, experience co-creation was hot, and especially in the area of social media. So as we move forward, then we see, I've got my laptop in the way, I can't see, peer-to-peer impacts of user-generated content. And so online experiences, all that, we're seeing things pivot in that area, just to use that as one example. So these are just a few items. And you'll see risk and crisis management. 2010, we were all about terrorism and natural disasters. And of course, now we're looking at COVID, both how to mitigate and how to evaluate, as well as how to move forward from that. So each of these topics, climate and sustainability, technology and big data, which is also related to social media, risk crisis management, service failure and recovery, which is also connected with brand loyalty, as those two sort of pair together, and then planning and policy were some of the big themes that I saw. And I'm not saying that this is what we're looking for. I'm just saying this is looking backwards. That's what I saw in some of the different areas. I do see a bit of a pivot from looking at the tourist or the traveler or the demand side. I'm seeing more of a pivot toward the supply side. We're interested in destinations, destination management, over tourism, the greening of tourism. What are we doing at our destinations after we've sort of sought out information about the traveler? Well, how are we using that information to make destinations better? And so we're kind of seeing that in some ways as well, as far as themes. But this is just a general idea.
Hey, Professor McGehee, I have a question about the topic trend. These days, I am highly interested in fMRI. I'm working with the doctors in the hospital to take a photo of a human brain,
Mhm.
how they works after seeing the signs and signals and images
Right.
and mobile.
Mhm.
But as far as I know, in tourism sectors have not much attention on fMRI, the technology and that area, brain area.
Yes.
But ultimately, actually, so far, the many things is survey-based, text-based, text mining, and then experimental design. But all things goes to the brain section. But in psychological section, they invest a lot of money for catch up the brain works and
Mhm.
how they works
Mhm.
and where they part in the works, sort of things. So what do you think about that topics?
Well, I'm pulling up all my slides, the ones I had in the back, and you're asking great questions to help me share not only the sort of the research trends, but
Wow.
also methods and methodology. And what I think we are moving forward to, this is not an assessment of work that I've looked at. This is me moving forward and thinking about some of the ideas, thinking creatively as we move forward, and some of the things that I would love to see advancements in. And it kind of centers around this idea of a bricoleur approach. And that is that you have to be able to approach something in a multifaceted way. You need to approach a problem with a lot of different tools. And that first item over here, the iceberg, and we've got the little minion looking guys right there. And you know the saying about icebergs, it's not what you can see that you need to worry about, it's what you can't see. And so as researchers, we need to be looking for what we can't see in whatever ways that we're able to do that. And that can be with this next icon, experimental design. We've got lots and lots of data out there that we need to figure out how to make sense of, both in terms of sentiment analysis and ethnography, but also that last item, which I think probably approaches or applies to what you're talking about, and that's the idea of bioinformation of all kinds. So many of us, you know, we have our Apple Watch and we know what our pulse is at any moment. We know how many hours we slept. We know when we're on that roller coaster, what our pulse went up to. And again, we have data. So we don't need to ask you, you know, how did you feel about it? We're able to look at those biometrics and see that very clearly. And so that's certainly the area that you're talking about. That said, in the US, the whole MRI thing would never happen here. So, so that's really interesting and fascinating to see, you know, how that will move forward. And I do say that I want this on a foundation. I would like to see a foundation of scholar activism, of co-creation. And when I say that, I'm not talking about co-creation in terms of marketing. I'm talking about co-creation of research side by side with our industry partners, people out in the field that have the expertise and knowledge that we can benefit from, that we just don't waltz in and say, here I am, I'm going to do my survey and I'm going to leave, I'm going to inconvenience you, and I'm going to leave and go off and publish my research without developing a relationship. So that's the other one. And then the last one, what's behind me? Practical applications. I've got my laptop in front of my screen. Practical applications. All these things have to help the industry. All these things have to help raise the bar for the folks that are out there doing the work on the daily, whether it's COVID or whatever it is that they're dealing with. We have to figure out ways to help make things better for them. Climate, social media, smart tourism, all those areas, we've got to figure out the methods that we can use to really do better with our industry and our phenomena and our community, if it's not necessarily industry that you're looking at. So yeah, you got me. You got all my backup slides. With that, any other final questions?
It's a very good time to talk with Dr. McGehee and question about your journal publication. This is a very important and critical one.
Don't be shy.
I'm too shy.
No, Dr. Koo, Professor Koo is not shy. Learn from him.
I'm shy. Okay. Probably.
Can I
okay,
ask a question?
go.
Yes.
Hello, thank you for your interesting presentation and all of this instruction, because I'm a new researcher and I never reviewed any of others. So it was a great opportunity to see how the process is and how it works. And I have a question about the as a being a researcher, sometimes I read the articles and some authors like really dig into like one specific subject for like over 10 years and publish over and over and little change, but like similar subject. And other researchers like research like quite comprehensive, like about the one industry. So what do you think about that as a reviewer?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question and a very insightful question for an early researcher to make that observation. You know, I've seen both approaches be very successful. One of the things that as you, I'll talk about the American system for promotion and tenure, is that when you put together your packet, and it could be very similar for you as well, when you put together your dossier and your packet to go up for promotion and tenure, you have to be able to write a narrative and make an argument for your body of work. So you have to be able to say, you know, I've published in this area, or maybe I've got 2 key areas that I'm interested in. And that's where my field is. And so that's really important. One great bit of advice that a friend of mine gave me that I wish I would have gotten early. She said, when you write your articles, she's like, I have 3 or 4 keywords, and I want at least one of those keywords in every title of my articles. So when I go up for tenure and I have 10 or 12 or however many articles, and somebody who's not in our field, not in tourism, because it'll go to the college and it'll go to the university, can look at that list and go, okay, I see this. I see the commonality. I see the common, the language, and I see the common vision. So I would say overwhelmingly, successful folks, that's the approach that they take. Not everybody, because some people somehow manage to kind of be pretty broad and aren't necessarily as focused, but then sometimes they're successful as well. And it also depends on how long their career is, because if you're looking at a 7, 8, 10-year career versus a 30-year career, obviously things are going to be more focused for that 10-year career, and then they're going to get a little broader with still the same foundation as you go through. Does that answer your question? That's a really good question.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Professor McGehee, may I go? Yep. Just like Professor Koo mentioned before, as a student, today's lecture felt like peeping around the field of professors or high-level researchers who can give a try on JTR, which is a top-tier journal, but really not close to the students like us. So I just learned a lot about the detailed process and the work of editors, which will help me a lot throughout my forward career, I think. I want to ask about the qualifications as a researcher. As a high experienced researchers and advisors yourself, you should have seen students who is kind of weighted or biased Some people like psychology, like you did your minor. Meanwhile, I majored economics before and have difficulties understanding the intangible psychology concepts. So I feel very deficient in conducting research in this area. But well, it would be great for me to do great around all the research scopes or interests. But some people say just focus on what you're good at, not on your flaws. So what would you recommend or advise to those students who is kind of waiting?
Okay, all right. Well, if I understand, so you're asking me sort of how your approach. Do you try to break out and dig more deeply in areas in which you're unfamiliar or you don't feel like they're strengths, or do you focus on your strengths? Is that basically what you're asking me? Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's, you know what, like most things, it's kind of a little bit of both, but I am not a brain surgeon. I don't know anything about brain surgery. I don't plan on learning about anything about brain surgery. Now that's a big inflated example, right? But that's way out of my field. But if you take a funnel, you think about, oops, I got to get out in the picture, a funnel that starts out there and then it goes to very, very narrow. And so maybe that narrow piece is, I will only do ethnographies, or I will only do experimental design, and I'm going to be the best darn experimental design person in the world. That might be a little too narrow, because you're painting yourself in a corner. There's another American saying, because you're limiting yourself in that you're only really familiar with one area. So if you're trying to look at a large field, I'm using agritourism again, just because that's what jumps into my head. And all you're doing is experimental design, you're really limiting yourself. But I don't think that, okay, agritourism, you do experimental design. I don't think you need to broaden to the point to where you can do everything from truly qualitative to truly quantitative to be able to address that, because you just can't. You can't do it and be good at it over time. There's another American saying called a mile wide and an inch deep. And so if you try to spread yourself too thin, then you're going to have some familiarity with a lot of different approaches, ontological or epistemological approaches, but then you won't have that depth. But conversely, you don't want to be so narrow that you're super deep, but it's just in this one area. So it really is a matter of finding that sweet spot in the funnel where you've got some breadth of knowledge and some breadth of awareness in areas that one, attest to your skills. I think that's really important. I think that's very self-aware of you to say, all right, I'm good in this area, maybe not so much in this one. Well, broaden that, push the edges out a little bit, test your comfort zone a bit, and then deepen it a little. To where you're approaching in a way that you're comfortable with, that you have experience with, that you're taking courses that are going to help you in that area. But it doesn't mean that you have to throw everything away and try to become somebody that you just aren't comfortable being. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. We'll work on it when you get here. And who are you working with? Are you working with Dr. Kim?
Oh,
Yalim?
I work with Dr. Nicola.
Oh, okay.
That's why I mentioned about economics. So
yeah.
I felt so deficient about psychology concepts, which is very important thing in our area, hospitality and tourism. So I'm still working on that, and also in methodologies.
Well, we don't need you to come in knowing everything. That's our job. In fact, I think you're really working as a PhD student when you realize how little you really know. Because I think sometimes we come in and we're all excited, we've got a research idea, we think we've got it all figured out, and bam, we get hit by reality and the breadth and depth of things. And so I think, again, it's very self-aware of you to recognize your strengths and weaknesses. And that's half the game. You know, you come into it with that. I guarantee you, if you work hard, Professor Nicolau will help you in every way he can. He is a wonderful human being. He is an extremely brilliant human being. So I'm very jealous that you're going to be a PhD student working with him.
I totally agree with your opinion. Okay.
Excellent.
Anyway, her future is bright, I guess.
Yes,
So,
it is.
okay,
It is.
forget
And I
about the-
learned a lot, and I learned a lot from Sekou and Kyung University, and yeah, I'll work on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'd be awesome.
I don't believe that. Anyway, any question from students? If you're not, I will.
And we are right at 90 minutes. That's generally what it takes for this presentation. Everybody thinks, oh, no way is it going to take that long. And it always does, because folks ask wonderful questions. And that's what I'm excited about. And I'll go ahead and stop share since
Okay, go ahead.
pictures. You can see everybody. Yeah.
Please go.
Professor, I have a question about the reviews that
Okay.
you actually, thank you for sharing about about writing a good research. My question is that sometimes when we receive a review from multiple reviewers, like those reviewers has different perspectives, so they might give you a different feedbacks for your research as well. So for example, one reviewer likes my methodology, but some might not like my methodology on the research. So if I receive those different feedbacks from each reviewers, I'm a little bit confused, like how can I judge which reviewer's feedback that I should follow when I'm fixing the research paper? So this is my question. How can we balance those things?
I get teased because I say that's a great question, but it really is. You all are really asking really good questions. We see this on the editorial side. One of the things, I guess I'll back up just a bit. One of the things that we try to do when we're assigning reviewers, sometimes I'll assign a reviewer because of the theoretical perspective, for example, that I'll say, oh, I know who's the best person for legitimacy theory, and I'm going to connect for that. And then somebody else may be your methodological person that you say, oh, I need to, this person's great with regression. I'm going to assign them. And then the third person, could be a combination of that or whatever. So we recognize, and we're pretty deliberate in, we want the reviewers to have a familiarity with the work, but we also want them coming from different perspectives. So it's not, often it's not too surprising to see reviewers coming at it maybe from different perspectives. So what I would recommend to you is, better than anyone what your research is about. So when you look at those reviews, and if you see one and you feel like they're diametrically opposed, if one is telling you A and the other is telling you B, or one is saying black and the other saying white, you need to use your judgment from your in-depth knowledge of the work. And if you agree that the one says black, that you say, you're right, I'm going to work on that area. Thank you very much. We've achieved that. And the other one says this is white, then you're able to say, what, respectfully, I appreciate your perspective, but based on, and then you give them the argument and you talk to them about why that's not the case. And so it's not unusual to get different perspectives and different reviews. The trick is for when you're able to, and it takes time to have confidence, right? Because you're saying, I don't know who these reviewers are, and they're telling me something, and I'm going to say, I disagree. And so I understand that can be a little bit scary, but I think, again, having the confidence and the work and knowing the in-depth the work is what's really important. And obviously you consult with your co-authors, you consult with the literature, if they say, you know, you need to, you know, go to Smith and they'll tell you that this is why, and Lee and Kim tell you this, then do what they, you know, they suggest. But if you really feel like it's not the right advice, then you just have to figure out the most polite way to respond to that.
Good.
I have a question.
Okay.
Thank you for a great presentation.
Mhm.
It's a quite personal question, but I have a background in marketing, and I just started to study hospitality and tourism as a PhD student.
Mhm.
Some professors say your different background can be your strengths, but as a starter, I feel like I'm kind of fall behind. Like, but earlier you mentioned the beauty of the tourism is like you see many researchers from other backgrounds, and I want to ask you like what you see in common among the journals successfully accepted written by the researchers with the different background.
Okay, so if I understand, so I'm a sociologist. My PhD is in sociology. You'll talk to a lot of people in our field that come from different backgrounds. I think that is absolutely positively a plus. I think you have to figure out how to, I mean, to make it a plus, you have to figure out in some ways, like for me in sociology, I have to kind of work on my own to maintain my, you know, my familiarity with that, because once you kind of get into the other field, it's a little harder to keep up with what's happening in your larger field or discipline. But I think it's absolutely beneficial. I also, through the years, have been able to leverage it as a benefit with co-authors, because people will say, oh, and I would think, gosh, yeah, background in marketing. Yeah, I want to co-author with you because you've got this background in an area that's really important to tourism. So finding those partnerships is also important. So you maximize your strength while also recognizing your weakness, right? Because maybe you don't have a deep background in tourism, but what you bring to the table, you need to emphasize. And then you also need to work at it. Now, I did things backwards too. I worked in the field in tourism. And then because of my passion for theory, I wanted more of a theoretical foundation. And so that's why I went from working in rural tourism development to sociology in development overall, rural development, you know, in general. And so I, you know, had a little bit of both. I would suggest also that if you have opportunities to be an intern or to work in industry or sit in on sessions where there are industry folks talking about issues that they have in their area, and particularly in tourism marketing, I would also suggest that you do that as well. And that helps you draw those commonalities and connect the dots between the work that you've done previous to this with the work that you're doing now and in the future. So yeah, I think marketing is great. You're gonna kick it.
Thank you for the great answers.
Anyone else?
Okay. Let me ask. You know what? Depends on students taking look at your background, and your bachelor degree and master degree and PhD degree is a bit different, and we are coming from different section and different school. But American culture is provide more generous opportunity for the students who want to go the next level. I mean, next level means it's better school and better school. And then finally, you can take a good chance and opportunity in being a good professor in a decent school. Here in Korea is a bit different. Anyway, what do you think is at this time in the diverse area and in the fast development of technology and in the future technology and future area, everything is very transforming now, and then diversity has become wider and wider. So what are your perspective of that, point for them, their next generation?
So help me understand the question. Maybe I'm just getting tired. So you're talking about.
My talking about is we are focused on the tourism discipline, but it's moving on to the diverse area, technology and data and biotechnology and whatever is much become more wide and wider, and we need to collaborate from the other disciplines, interdisciplines. So what's the recommendation to our students, the next generation, how they cope with the coming years?
Yeah,
future?
I don't know. No, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it is an exciting time, and there are, as I also mentioned earlier about tourism being kind of a big playground for, virtually every field and discipline can come into this space and to do work in this space. And so we're at a very flex and flux kind of time. But I guess I think that related to that, as young researchers look ahead, you want to, like earlier at the very beginning, I said, cast your net wide, but then focus, focus, focus. I think you're at a time in your career where casting your net wide is probably a good idea. Exploring a lot of different areas. What are you passionate about? What gets you excited? Because you've got to be pretty passionate about it. If you're looking ahead to a 30 or 40 year career, you've got to be able to find an area and find a channel that you're very passionate about, and that you can maintain that, for a long time. I used the new boyfriend girlfriend example earlier, that at the beginning of your research, it's like the beginning of a romance, and you think that person is perfect and they can't do anything wrong, and they're just dreamy, and they're like a, I don't know, a K-pop performer all wrapped in one or something like that. You think they're great. So, but then over time, maybe you start to see the imperfections. And it's the same way with our research. Sooner or later, you're going to start to see the shortcomings of your research. The important thing is that the thing that you get passionate about to begin with, the core of that idea, you stay passionate about, that doesn't go away. And so I think there are lots of opportunities. There are opportunities in technology, certainly. Absolutely, tech is in our name, Virginia Tech, and I'm seeing our area, our new department head is certainly someone who's in the field of information technology, and so I definitely see us going in that direction. But that's not the only direction, because we're going to need support in lots of different areas. We're going to need, at the end of the day, we're still going to need that face-to-face, person-to-person experience. We might get automated everything, and we might be able to use our phone to check into our hotel room and to do all those things. But at the end of the day, the reason why we travel when we go to different places is to be around different people, and to learn from and to enjoy and experience other people. So, we're always going to need that aspect as well. And we're going to need folks that can navigate that in a reasonable way.
Okay.
That's my thought today.
Yeah, good. Very good. Any question from students? If not, I'll keep asking her. I have many questions. Okay. And McGehee, you by accident or anyway, you happen to meet many Korean students in your school or in the conference.
Mhm.
So what do you think about their pros and cons, and then their strengths and weakness?
I think they're all awesome. I do. I do. I would never venture to make any kind of sweeping generalizations one way or the other, but I have been fortunate. I chose university life in part because of the diversity that I was going to be exposed to for the rest of my life. I walk across, I mean, we are, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Virginia Tech, but we are 4 hours from Washington, D.C. We're surrounded by beautiful mountains, but we are rural. We are a little town in the middle of a lot of rural. But every time I walk across that campus, I hear at least 2 or 3 languages, at least, on a typical day, walking from one end of the campus to the other. And that diversity just continues to grow. And that's something that I'm passionate about. And that's also something that I think everybody needs to be at the table and everybody needs to be participating. And so I look forward to meeting yet more Korean students and folks from your university as time goes by, because I think it can only make my life richer and better and more well-informed. And there's my political answer. But also the truth,
Yeah, I'm totally agree with you. You know, America, the strengths of America and the strengths of American culture is they are converged and accepting the very smart students and people from all over the world, from India, China, Korea, whatever, and then they make them survive there and they're successful there. Wow, it's a wonderful culture. But here in Korea, we are very small, not very, but a relatively small country and the one homogeneous, you know, culture. Majority of culture is homogeneous, and then so it's hard to get the kind of stuff. But market is a small size, so that's why I want to. It's difficult, tough. That's one of the point I ambitious and then jealousy to the America about it. Okay.
But we are a little jealous of you as well. I've never been to Seoul. I've never been to
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I would love to come. And all of my friends, I will tell you, and this is silly, this is way off topic, are totally into the Korean version of telenovelas. So like Korean soap operas is what we would call it, on Netflix and other places. And they keep telling me, oh, you've got to start watching this. You've got to get into it. So,
oh, really?
So there are many aspects of Korean culture that we love: the food, obviously the music, and the theater, and so and as we've seen the emergence of Korean culture across the Oscars, every aspect, the Grammys, those big awards. It's certainly, you may say it's a small place, but it's making a big impression in the world. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Okay. You must come to Seoul.
I must. I think that's a great idea.
I'm trying to invite you.
We can get this global situation settled down. It would be wonderful. That sounds wonderful. So yeah.
Yeah. You know, students like what I said. I've been the Marshall University, West Virginia, as a faculty member 2 years. And surprised to see her resume, and then she graduated from that school.
My undergrad.
Yeah.
Yep. There's probably something Marshall sitting around here somewhere if I looked hard enough. The house. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. I certainly appreciate the effort and the opportunity to get to see you and chat about things. You ask great, provocative, insightful questions, and
Yes.
I learned a lot. And I'm writing down notes and things that I wanted to be able to look at and address. So thank
Yeah.
you all very much for spending time with me this morning for you and this evening for me, and hopefully we'll get to see each other in person very soon.
Okay, Dr. McGehee, thank you very much. And then don't forget about the naming on the manuscript 철목고 when I submitting to the JTR.
That's how we like the double
Reject
blind.
bomb.
The double blind. That's how we like the double blind.
Reject and throw away the garbage can.
All right, everybody take
Okay.
care.
Okay, I highly appreciate your attendance, and it's your insightful lecture and the guideline for the future generation JTR is a great helpful to them to when they submitting to the U journal.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. I'll see you all later. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.